Kyle and Sean, I bet you're surprised to know that I knew all about the race across America. Well, it's because of my friend, Jonathan Boyer, first American to ride the Tour de France. Also, I believe was a winner of the Ram on 2 occasions, about 10 years apart. Anyway, well done. It was fun talking about you and talking about the Ram. Wish you could have been here. We're at a Helping Rhinos event, and we're trying to stop the extinction of those guys. Talk to you soon.
Hi, Kyle and Sean. I think you've done tremendous things and very well done. The only trouble is, if I'd have come with you, you'd have left me behind. But that's life. Well done, guys. Phil.
You are listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. I'm Kyle Bryant.
And I'm Sean Baumsart. Together, we're navigating life with disability.
All right, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This is episode 19. You may have recognized those voices at the very beginning of the recording. That is Paul and Phil. They've been broadcasting the Tour de France for a long time. If you've heard the Tour de France in the past, 20, 30 years or something, those are the voices you would hear, so really appreciate them lending their voices to the podcast.
Yeah, it's kind of a cool thing in terms of how we got it. Some good friends of ours were at a fundraising event, like was mentioned on the recording, and they got to chatting, and of course Paul and Phil lent their voice, and they sent us that little greeting. So kind of a cool thing to add, especially right now in the midst of the tour.
Yeah, big time. So, Sean, we were at the Waterfront Film Festival a few weeks ago, and what did you think of that experience?
Man, that was amazing. I had such a great time. Even, like I said, it's been a few weeks or, however long, and I still feel like I'm on cloud 9. Just an incredible experience meeting the organizers behind the event, the people connected to the cause there. Cute little town with just an incredibly supportive energy. I had such a great time. In fact, it's kind of on my bucket list, I guess you could say. Holly LeBlanc is a fellow FA'er that I connected with a couple years ago on social media. Kyle, I know you met her years ago, but being at the Waterfront Film Festival was actually the first time I was able to meet her face to face, and that was incredible. It was such an encouraging and just heartwarming experience to be there for a few days. What did you think?
Yeah, specifically about Holly, she is just an incredible person. She's the one who kind of set up the connection between our film and the Waterfront Film Festival. And Holly has been dealt an incredibly tough hand in life. She was diagnosed with FA. And then recently she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And she has faced this situation with incredible guts and grace, and she is just an absolute inspiration and just a model for the rest of us facing difficult things in our life. So we had such a great time with Holly, and I know I speak for you, Sean, that we had a great time with Holly and all of her friends. She has such a supportive community, and she seems to be the center of that community. And everyone just kind of feeds off of her energy, and it's kind of a circular process. So it was really neat to see.
She almost feels like the mayor of that little town. Everybody knows her. Everybody likes her. She shakes hands or hugs everybody, and it was really cool. And like I said, she was been dealt a really tough hand, but her energy, her enthusiasm, her attitude, her smile, her laugh, all those things have been seemingly untouched, which is incredibly moving, inspiring, encouraging,
Yeah.
All the words you can think of. Absolutely amazing woman.
I think even the mayor of the town of Holland sees Holly as the mayor of the town of Holland, you know?
Yeah, probably. Hey, this is kind of cool. I'm gonna tell you a secret and tell the whole world. We got Holly a gift that will go in the mail after this podcast airs. So I don't know if it'll get back to her before her gift shows up, but a really cool, neat gift to help. What do you call it? Like set in stone these wonderful memories of the film festival.
Beautiful. Hey, while we were at the film festival, you were telling me about a story or about an experience you had riding from the airport to the hotel. Why don't you tell all of our listeners about that, Sean?
Yeah, it was a great way to start the trip. So, I flew into Grand Rapids from California, and the folks organizing the festival had arranged to have, to pick me up. So they picked her up early in the afternoon, and then they had to come back later in the evening and pick me up. So I'm hanging out there with Pam. Pam was one of the event coordinators for the festival, and we're just waiting for my luggage to come off the plane. So we're just sitting there chatting, getting to know each other. And in the midst of conversations, she had mentioned Holland, Michigan, which is where we were going, about 45 minutes away. So she said Holland a couple times, and randomly this young lady was walking by, and she was like, "Oh my God, did you say Holland? Oh my gosh, Holland, Michigan?" And Pam and I were both like, yeah. So Pam's like, yeah, that's where we live, and that's where we're heading. And this young lady was like, oh my gosh, that's where I'm trying to get to. I need to go to Holland, and my friend over there, we're trying to get to Holland, but we don't really have plans as to how we're going to get there. And so there was this awkward couple of minutes of Pam and I are going to Holland, but we didn't offer them a ride. And these ladies were like, well, we need to go to Holland, but they weren't asking for a ride. There was just this awkward pause of, we're hoping somebody says something so we can move on.
Anyway, yeah.
And Pam just kept looking. I just met Pam, and then I have no idea who these two ladies are. And to make matters even more awkward, the two ladies had never even met. They weren't friends. They were just going to the same event. They had connected on Facebook the day or two previously and said, yeah, we're both landing around midnight. Maybe we can share an Uber or whatever. So they had made plans to meet at baggage claim. And then from there, they had no clue what they were doing. Like, I think it was a part of the challenge for them. Yeah, let's just show up and see what happens. They were very, go with the flow kind of folks. So anyway, after a good 5 or 7 minutes of just awkward back and forth of no real direction, I think Pam, she was so sweet and felt like, well, we do have room if you guys need a ride. And of course, they were like, oh my gosh, that would be so great. So we ended up giving these two total strangers a ride to Holland. And it was just a really interesting conversation along the way. They were there for some sort of... I forget what they call it, but like awareness / consciousness retreat. Yeah. And the entire conversation in the car was all about getting in touch with your own consciousness and awareness and so on and so forth. And it was just really a new agey 45-minute car ride.
Nice. And then you got there. They were like going to some place on a hill, but it was the gate was there and no one knew the code or something. So
thankfully, Pam and her husband dropped me off first. They took me to the hotel, and then I could just tell from, it was just really bizarre. The two ladies were staying in two different Airbnbs, and because of the way the lake is situated around the town, it was like a 15-minute drive apart from each other. So, and neither one of them were making it easy for Pam and Mitch, who did this incredibly nice gesture. Neither one made it easy by saying, "Oh, just drop us off anywhere and we'll go from there." No, it was a matter of, okay, well, she needs to go here and I need to go there, so make it happen. It was really kind of, well, I don't want to be mean, but in a sense, it was borderline ungrateful.
Yeah. Well, and for a little perspective, too, 15 minutes in Holland, Michigan is a long ways because
really
there's no
far.
Traffic. Like,
Right.
Everything is like 5 minutes apart. And so,
And it's already midnight. It's not like Pam and Mitch, it's not the middle of the day with nothing to do. It's
Right.
They've been going all day to get this ready. They've made 2 trips to the airport. They've had to entertain you for a few hours before I got there.
Which
So,
is always a
it's
pain in
like,
the butt.
or yeah, you said it, not me. But it's like everybody just wants to go to bed, and I felt terrible for them. And finally, I think they just said, "Hey, we're gonna go to one spot, and you both have to get out." And that one spot happened to be a gated community up on a hill, and behind the gate, it was like a mile and a half to get to the house of just dark mountain road. And they didn't have the right code. They didn't really seem to have anything in their life together. So all this to say, I really think they needed a weekend of getting in touch with their own consciousness.
Awesome. Well, I hope they accomplished their goal for that weekend.
Yeah, me too. I hope it was really beneficial.
We have an incredible guest on the show today. Dr. David Fajgenbaum is on the show, and he has a rare disease called Castleman's disease. And we'll hear a little more about that specific disease from Dr. Fajgenbaum. But he's a leader in the rare disease community, in the scientific community, because of his collaborative network style of research that helps bring the best ideas to the surface and put them into action. And then he's an absolutely amazing leader in the patient community for his spirit and his willingness to do whatever it takes to move the community forward. And so we'll hear a little more of the story from Dr. Fajgenbaum, but welcome, Dr. Fajgenbaum. Welcome to the Disabled Dudes podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Kyle, thank you so much for having me on. What an honor it is to hear you saying those words about me, because I feel the exact same way about you. And Sean, I'm looking forward to us chatting today so I can get to know you a bit better too. But truly, it's an honor for you to say that, because like I said, I feel all the same way about you. We
Thank you. Yeah. And for our listeners, Dr. Fajgenbaum and I we met really, I think, at a Rare Disease Day, maybe in Harrisburg at the state capitol here in Pennsylvania. And, we see each other probably like once a month, I feel like, sometimes at different rare disease functions and different meetings and things like that. And, that's the way it is in the rare disease community here in Pennsylvania and really all over the country, is that, you really get involved and you meet so many great people.
Well, I feel the same way. Just as you said, rare diseases, we all have too few resources. We all don't have enough either public support or enough fundraising to do research. So we all have to work together. And there's that saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. And I really do feel like the momentum we're creating for rare diseases, for each one of our rare diseases, really helps all the other rare diseases as well.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to touch on some of the points from your story that really illustrate your story to the listeners?
Sure. So, Kyle, I was a third-year medical student at Penn, training to become an oncologist. My mom passed away from cancer when I was a sophomore in college at Georgetown, and I decided I would dedicate my life to becoming an oncologist. I wanted to treat patients with cancer, and I wanted to get involved in cancer research. And then during my third year of medical school at Penn, I went from being a healthy med student training to be a doctor to being hospitalized at the same hospital I had been working at previously with multiple organ failure. My liver, my kidneys, my bone marrow all completely shut down, and I began battling a disease that I'd never even heard of before. As I mentioned, my organs were failing. I had enlarged lymph nodes. I was awake for only less than an hour a day. I was so sick. They hospitalized me in the ICU. I had a retinal hemorrhage and went blind in my left eye. Ended up gaining about 50 pounds of fluid, but really went from being this totally healthy medical student to being on my deathbed. And just a couple months later, after spending about 2 months hospitalized, I even had my last rites read to me because the doctors did not think I was going to survive, and of course had to say goodbye to my family and friends. Just a couple of days before I had my last rites read to me, the doctors finally made the diagnosis. I have something called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, a rare disease where the immune system becomes activated and then starts to attack all of the organs in your body for no known reason. We don't know why it attacks, and unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to stop the attack. Castleman disease as a whole affects about 5,000 patients each year in the U.S., and my subtype affects about 1/3 of that, so about 1,500 patients each year. About a third of us die within 5 years of diagnosis, and another third die within 10 years of diagnosis. So this was obviously really challenging up front to, of course, battle the disease, and then unfortunately, this disease has it's been a long-term fight. I've gone on to have a total of 5 of these life-threatening hospitalizations. All of them requiring intensive care unit hospitalizations and eventually a lot of chemotherapy to get into remission. And we use chemotherapy in Castleman disease because chemotherapy just kills the whole immune system because we don't know what to target. So basically, we just drop the atomic bomb, which wipes out the immune system. But after my 4th episode, so I was able to go back to medical school after number 3. After I spent about almost 5 months hospitalized, I went back to med school. And was back on my path to become a cancer doctor when about a year later I had my 4th flare. And at that point I realized that I really couldn't go back to my normal life. I had been, I was at the time treated with the only drug in development. It didn't work for me. So now I knew that there were no more options for me. And I started to learn how little the medical community knew about Castleman disease. So with number 4, I decided I would dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to trying to cure this disease. And that was in May of 2012. So it's been a little bit over 5 years of really putting everything I have into this. I was able to finish med school, and as my last part of med school, began conducting research, laboratory research into Castleman disease, and then also creating a network called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network to bring together researchers and physicians from around the world to try to take down Castleman disease. And we've really made incredible progress in the last 5 years, progress that I hope our approach can be shared with other rare diseases. So other rare diseases can also follow a similar model. And just to kind of share a few highlights, there was no diagnostic criteria, and we now have a diagnostic criteria. There were no FDA-approved drugs. Now there's one FDA-approved drug called Siltuximab. That drug works for about a third of patients, so we're still fighting hard to try to come up with solutions for the other 2/3 of patients. And our research led to me trying a drug that had never been used before in Castleman disease on myself, and it's working. I'm now in my longest remission ever thanks to this treatment. So we've made a lot of progress, but we're still plowing ahead at full speed trying to take this disease down.
So I do have a question. Hearing all that, David, I mean, what a phenomenal, on one side, it's a phenomenal story. And of course, on the other side, it's a terrible story that I wouldn't want to ever hear anybody else, having to live through. But, up against this wall in your life, you talked about after I think you said third episode, you went back to medical school and started to kind of go through it again, and then boom, hit with the fourth episode, and okay, at that point you said, okay, life as I thought I knew it isn't going to really be that. What I'm curious about is, in the face of such a prognosis, and knowing doctors really don't know a whole lot about it, there like you said, there was no effective drug on the market. What kept you from saying, well, this is over? This is a bummer. So I guess that's it. What in the world kept you from, that sort of foreclosure in your own life or your own mentality?
Yeah, thanks for that comment, that question. When I think about it, I think that a few things contributed to it. One, I'd have to say is that my mom, who I mentioned was my inspiration for wanting to go into medical school. She was the ultimate fighter. She never ever backed down from anything, and she was able to create silver linings out of bad situations. And you talked about finding a silver lining, but she was actually she would create silver linings in bad situations. And so I think I had her as the ultimate role model, this kind of person who didn't ever give up, despite facing cancer and despite eventually passing away from cancer. But certainly just, I had the blueprint in front of me. I had this amazing person in front of me who showed me how it was done. That was one. I think number two is that I had 3 years of medical school training under my belt. So I knew enough to know science and immunology well, but I wasn't yet jaded by being in medicine for a decade or 2 decades, where maybe I would have been more realistic and realized just how hard it would be. And I would have said, wait a minute, I don't want to do this. It's going to be too hard. But I was kind of naive and thinking, you know what? I can take a disease down. And I didn't realize how tough it would be. So I think that probably helped. I think maybe third is that after my mom passed away, I mentioned I went on this track to become a cancer doctor, but I also started a foundation in memory of my mom called AMF, which is a support network for grieving college students. So college students that have lost a friend or family member or have a sick loved one. And that organization and creating that organization taught me a lot about growing movements and causes and chasing a mission and trying to make an impact. And so I also had a bit of a training ground where I had built something before, and I knew I could build something. And AMF is still doing well. It's still strong. We're about 12 years old and still helping college students all over the country. But for me, I think it is that combination of having this wonderful role model, having medical training that taught me enough, but I wasn't yet entrenched in medicine to realize just how hard it would be. And then also having some experience taking a cause on. And maybe the fourth thing I should mention too is I also around that time got the chance to meet Josh Summer, who is another rare disease warrior. And he has a disease called chordoma. It's a rare form of cancer. And Josh was diagnosed with chordoma his freshman year of college. And he was at Duke. He was an engineering student at Duke, just a brilliant guy. He dropped out of college because he realized that he couldn't just go back to just his normal way of life. He would need to create the Chordoma Foundation. And Josh inspired me so much when I met him. And so I had these great role models, and that made me feel like, I've got to do this. And trust me, I didn't think that it was actually going to work. I mean, it's not like I thought, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to, figure out a treatment for myself. But I was going to go down swinging. I wasn't going to let this thing take me down without giving it everything I had.
Sure. I love that. Go down swinging, man. That's the best way to go. That's what we're all doing. So
I think of.
Go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, I don't mean to take you off track, Kyle.
No,
but
go for it.
I think of a quote that Kyle and I both love, and we've used it 100 times, and I can't remember the whole thing, but it talks about the man in the ring. And no matter what you say about the man that went in the ring, he was in the ring trying. And I can't remember word for word. It's pretty long. But at the very least, he went in and fought and gave it his best. So just hearing that makes me think of it. But yeah, sorry.
No, that
probably didn't make sense. So maybe we'll just...
That's totally relevant. And it also relates to something you talked about last episode where, success, like fighting for success doesn't mean you will reach success, but you can't get there without fighting, and I think that kind of relates here too. Like, yeah, like you said, you never thought it would work, but there's no choice. Like, you got to try and see what happens. Can you, you talked about Josh creating the Chordoma Foundation. Can you talk a little bit about the idea behind your Castleman Disease Collaborative Research Network? Is that the right name?
Yeah, Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. That's right.
Okay, so can you talk about maybe the idea behind it and the way it approaches solving some of the issues that are in science?
Sure, absolutely. So I mentioned May 2012 was when I decided I would take this disease on. And the first thing I did was look to see, what's going on in the community right now? And then secondly, what's going on more broadly in the rare disease research community. And I found that there were some real issues within the Castleman's community and beyond in rare disease where researchers were not collaborating. There was really slow movement of information and communication. Basically, you publish a paper and hope someone reads it, and then they publish a paper and hope someone reads it. And that the time for communicating things would be months and years for findings to get communicated. But so little collaboration. I also was shocked that there weren't like blueprints or plans for how a disease would be attacked. It was kind of every researcher for him or herself applying for projects that they thought would be interesting and might make an impact, but there was no sort of overarching strategy or game plan for making progress. And then I found that tissue samples, blood samples, samples from rare disease patients were oftentimes just sitting in biobanks or in storage for years, even decades. When patients like myself and like you guys are struggling with our disease, we don't want these samples sitting in freezers. We need them to be used. And so thinking about these challenges, I came up with a different way of approaching rare disease research. And before I go into my approach, I'll say just kind of generally, research typically moves forward in the rare disease space by a foundation like the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network or another research foundation, raising money and then inviting researchers to apply to use the money how they think they should, just through a typical grant process. Basically saying, come up with your best ideas and send them to me. And then usually foundations will have an advisory board that will choose the best application. And this approach can be really, really effective if you have lots and lots of people applying for grants. Because if you have hundreds of people applying, then you can be pretty confident that some really great ideas are going to be proposed. But if you only have a few people applying for a grant like that, it's actually really unlikely that one of those few people that applies is actually going to have like the best idea that needs to be done most urgently. And so rather than taking this approach of letting other people apply to use the funding, we kind of flipped it and we said, well, we're going to start out by first identifying everyone in the world studying Castleman disease or treating Castleman disease. We're going to connect them through an online discussion board and through in-person meetings and webinars. And once we've connected them into this network, then we're going to get all of their ideas. The fancy term is crowdsourced. So at first it was just sending out a Google survey. Now we have a platform called CoDigital where each of our physicians and researchers can contribute their ideas for what research should be done. So we built a community. We got all of the ideas for what research should be done, and then we prioritized those ideas. And once we prioritized them, we decided to reach out and find the best person in the world to do each of those studies for us. And the kind of way I like to describe it is that basically rare disease research typically is reactive. So you fund the best applicant. In our case, we're kind of proactive in the sense that we find out what the best study is and what the best thing to do would be. And then we go out and recruit the best person in the world to do that study. And we found that this has been very successful for us and really a lot more efficient than kind of hoping that that we'll get the right grants or we get the right applications. And the analogy I use is it's kind of like you can either hope that the stars align or kind of wait for them to align, or you can kind of align the stars. And so we try to align the stars with our funding.
I'm curious, you may have already mentioned it, but how long has that network been in place, and how many researchers or people involved in the network would you say you have?
Yeah, so we started in 2012, and started in May of 2012. I'd say within a year, we had a couple hundred researchers that were part of our network that were contributing ideas. Now we're up to over 400 physicians and researchers all around the world. Yeah, which is really important because this is a rare disease where previously there were just a handful of researchers actually doing research. The difference here is that part of our network doesn't just include the people who are actively conducting Castleman disease research. It also includes people who have expertise in diseases like Castleman disease, who have an interest in Castleman disease. And basically it means that all those people, even if they don't do Castleman's research in their lab, all those people can contribute ideas for what research should be done. So even though it won't be in their lab, all these brilliant people who never would have had the chance to contribute their ideas before, now they can give their ideas, and then we go find the best person in the world to then go do their ideas.
Cool. So what kind of results do you see as a result of putting together a network like this?
So I think there's a few things that I'd pull attention to. The first was that when I got sick, if you read a medical textbook about Castleman disease or read published papers, Castleman disease, so every patient with Castleman disease, we all have really enlarged lymph nodes when we get sick. We have these big lymph nodes, we get flu-like symptoms, and then all of our organs start shutting down. So it's kind of like an autoimmune disease in some ways. It's kind of like cancer in some ways. It's kind of like a really bad flu or infection in some ways. It's kind of like a combination of those three. But all of us have big lymph nodes, and so the medical community used to think that the big lymph nodes, the enlarged lymph nodes, were really like tumors, almost like cancer, and they were releasing these substances called cytokines that then turned the immune system to go haywire. So the idea is with these lymph nodes turned on the immune system, then the immune system wreaked havoc. But through our network and through our discussion board and through our crowdsourcing, our community, I asked lots and lots of questions to the community. Well, that model just didn't make sense. And the more and more questions I asked and the more we all collaborated and communicated, the more we realized that model was completely upside down. It wasn't that the lymph nodes were turning on the immune system. It was actually that the immune system was on that was causing the lymph nodes to get big in the first place. And you can kind of think about it like if you get a cold or the flu and your lymph nodes in your neck get swollen, no one would ever tell you that you have tumors in your lymph nodes and you need chemotherapy. They would say that you have a cold or whatever, and that's why your lymph nodes are big, and they'll go away once your immune system calms itself down. And so that was a really seminal change, and that really is a result of this community. If it was just me reading through papers and doing research on my own, it would have been really hard for me to come up with that really game-changing realization. But it was because I had at the time hundreds of others who had been thinking about treating Castlemans for years that we could iterate and come to this realization, which we then published in 2014. So I think that's one example of how the network has been really useful. I think the second one is that, like many rare diseases, there was no diagnostic criteria for Castleman disease. And like many rare diseases, we still have not identified the genetic causes or the genetic mutation responsible for Castleman disease. And so without a criteria or a gene to search for, it's really hard to diagnose Castleman disease. And because of this network that we assembled, we were able to turn to the network and to get additional data from physicians throughout the network, and then hold a meeting of members of the network to come up with a diagnostic criteria that they all agreed on and that we published a few months ago in the top hematology journal. And though I think a diagnostic criteria could have been developed in isolation by a small group of people, the fact that the entire world of Castleman's community was a part of it, and that we had 8 countries, 5 continents, we had experts from everywhere weigh in, that means that I think it's going to be accepted for years to come. Whereas if this was something that we just did in the U.S., that someone in Europe or Japan or somewhere else in Asia may not agree with, and they may come up with a whole other meeting to hold another diagnostic criteria. But really it's because we had everyone at the table and everyone on board, including 2 patients that were part of the diagnostic criteria process. I think that this is gonna live on for a long time, and because it'll be consistent criteria for a long time, I think that's going to help the research effort. And then maybe I'll give a third example, and that's a study that we recently got data back on. And I mentioned that Castleman's involves the immune system really going berserk. And so it goes berserk, but we can't figure out why. And we've never been able to find any sort of a virus that could explain why it's going berserk. But we recently did a study with a researcher at Columbia, and this is a perfect example of our kind of model in practice. And that was that that through this crowdsourcing exercise, someone gave the idea that you should do something called viral hunting. And basically it's a search process to say, can we find a new virus? Even if it's never been found before, it's a way to look for a potentially a novel or new virus never discovered before. And someone suggested we do that through part of our crowdsourcing. And then the next step was, okay, well, how important is it? And it actually got prioritized. I think it was the number 2 prioritized study out of all of our studies on our prioritized list. And we started to find out, well, who's the world's expert for doing this kind of a study? And we found out that the world's experts at Columbia University, his name's Ian Lipkin. So we went to Dr. Lipkin and we said, we want you to do this pathogen or viral hunting study. And his response was, well, I don't really know anything about Castleman disease. And we told him, we said, that's okay. You don't need to be an expert on Castleman disease. We've got all the experts. We can certainly help you with understanding the disease. But we really need the best person in the world to do this study. And you are the best person in the world to do this pathogen study or viral hunting. And so he agreed to do it. And we just got the data back on it recently. We're working on publishing the paper. But there's some important findings from it. And that was that we didn't find a novel virus, but we did find a virus that many people have heard of before and that know of. We found that recurrently in patients. And so maybe this virus is playing some sort of role. The bottom line is it wasn't the biggest breakthrough ever to say that we didn't find a new virus, but the key is that we took the right approach. We worked with the best person. If we had just gone with whoever applied for our grant, Dr. Lipkin never would have applied because he didn't even know anything about Castleman, so he wouldn't have applied for Castleman's grant. And so we would have had someone else who was probably good. They would have done the study. But if they had a negative finding, like if they didn't find a virus just like Dr. Lipkin did, we would have always wondered, well, maybe it was just because it wasn't in the hands of the best scientists. Maybe if we did the study all over again with Dr. Lipkin, maybe we would have found something. But we don't have to have that worries because we did. We went with the best person in the world, and we didn't find a new virus. So that makes us feel a lot more confident in the results.
So, David, I read the New York Times article about you, and for our listeners, we will put that in the notes on our website so you can click on that and check out this awesome article. You mentioned the word berserk, and it reminded me of a photo that I saw of you in that New York Times article. Your friends used to call you the Beast. Can you talk about that?
That's right. So, Kyle, you've seen me in my time since being the Beast, and you probably never would have thought that this guy should be called the Beast because I spent all my time looking into microscopes and doing data analyses these days, and no one would ever confuse me as being called the Beast these days. But yeah, I played college football, and I used to train all the time. I was even a personal trainer at one point, and when I was in college, and I looked very different than I look now. I was about 40 pounds heavier, and yes, I was called the Beast.
And yoked. I mean, he won't say it himself, but I saw a picture and you were yoked.
Yep.
Man, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy needs to stop going to the gym.
Well, and I mean, the point of that picture is to draw a contrast, because in that article there's a picture of you in your football days, and then there's a picture of you, during one of the episodes where you were in the hospital. And so, I mean, it just draws an amazing contrast, and really, it shows the real thing that is going on, that is happening, and that you're fighting against. I think it's a really powerful thing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I was recently talking to someone about this, and they were saying, well, it's kind of like Castleman is also, this beast of a disease. And to your point, I look, when I get sick, I get very, very sick, and all of my organs shut down. I spend weeks in the hospital. So, I look very sick when I'm sick. And I think that being able to show, that dichotomy is really important. It kind of just shows how relentless this disease is. But it's been a crazy journey with a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah.
You talked about being sick and getting sick, but I think earlier you said, what's it been, like 3 years?
Yeah, so that's the exciting part. So I was diagnosed 7 years ago. August 10th will be 7 years since I got sick. And in my first 3.5 years, I had all 5 of my life-threatening hospitalizations. I spent months and months in the ICU, got lots of chemotherapy over those 3.5 years. And since January of 2014, which is now 3.5 years, I haven't had any relapses, any flares since I started myself on this new treatment that I mentioned hadn't been used before for Castleman disease.
Where are we at with that particular treatment? Obviously, you could say it's working for you. Has there been any data to suggest it could work for a lot of other people?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that. That's the really exciting news. And so, so far we've tried the drug on 3 other patients, and all 3 of those patients have had good responses. So, all 3 of them have had improvement in symptoms and have also not had any sort of further relapses. So that's the really good news. Maybe even the better news than those 3 patients is that the studies that we did on my blood and on my lymph node that made me want to try this drug, we've now done those on about 20 more patients. And we haven't published the data yet, but basically we found that there's also the same sort of pattern and the same sort of signal from these 20 other patients as we saw in me, which really suggests that this drug could work for many more patients, and that maybe it's an answer for a lot of Castleman disease patients. I think that medicine and science has taught us to not get too overly optimistic. I'm certain it's not going to work for all of us, but I do believe that there's data to support that it could work for a really large percentage of us.
Well, that's incredible.
Awesome.
So
yeah, I'm really excited. We just found that out recently.
So I feel like you are the ultimate enemy to Castleman disease, and you're the ultimate machine to be able to fight this, because you are a patient, you have insight into what this disease does. But then, you have the tools that allow you to get in the lab and actually look in the microscope. Most rare disease patients, we don't know what to look for through a microscope. But you also have the patient responsibility of participating in the community and raising the money and doing everything else. How do you balance those, or do they kind of play off of each other and motivate each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first off, I appreciate you saying that. It really means a lot that you'd say that. And I think that for me, they really do. They really do synergize. And so I get to spend time with other Castleman disease patients, and that motivates me to fight even harder. Those same patients that I get to spend time with, they want to contribute samples to research because they know that my team and we're not just researchers looking to publish papers. We're here to cure a disease. And I think that can make them maybe even more excited about the research, give even more samples or maybe contribute more funding for research because I think they do, we do have that connection. Now I think that, all researchers, should get that kind of support. And I think all researchers are obviously doing it for the right reasons, but I do think that that can help patients to want to get more involved.
Yeah.
And then, this is my work. It's my hobby. It's my life. And it's my passion. And when you kind of combine all those things together, it means that I get to live a really fulfilled life, trying to do something that means a lot to me. But I would say the same thing to you, that you're doing everything you can do and that you are fighting against your disease in such a heroic way. And, I think that this idea I said earlier, which is my mom used to create silver linings. I mean, Kyle and Sean, I haven't got a chance to talk to you as much, or this is the first time we're chatting, but Kyle, you're creating a silver lining and you're making what was a tough situation into something that is positive for other people and future people that will be diagnosed with Friedreich's ataxia. But I think this concept of creating a silver lining is something that us in the rare disease community can really relate to.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for saying that. Really means a lot to me. And I just really love the fact that we're going to be creating lots of silver linings together. That's our role. So yeah, that's great.
But I will tell you, I'm just so incredibly intrigued, and then also just somewhat inspired of your commitment and your tenacity to really unpack this disease and condition for yourself. But I know and I trust that beyond doing it for yourself, there's a whole lot more that's motivating you. I'm curious, can you talk about what drives you? What gets you out of bed every day to keep doing what you're doing?
So it's definitely the other patients and the family members of other patients that I've gotten a chance to get to know. Just like in Friedreich's ataxia, we're a family, and we feel like a family. And so though I'm healthy and well right now, I know all too well that this disease can turn course very quickly. And so the patients that I know that may be healthy and well right now, I want to figure this thing out before it does come back for them. And so it's very much the other patients that motivate me. There's also this opportunity that I think we have right now in time where if we continue to do what we're doing and we deliver on the studies that we have planned, that we really can change the course of history for Castleman disease. And I think rare diseases in general are at a position for that, and that's because medical technologies and techniques are now available and cheaper than ever before. And if the right studies are lined up at the right time with the right researchers, then there really is a chance to change history right now. And that is so exciting for me to think that we can do things today that can help people for years to come.
Love that. All right. Well, before we end, we want to get the social media coordinates for anything you're doing for AMF, for CDCN. Yeah. So how do we follow you in the progress you're making?
Great. I would love it. So our Twitter handle, and also to find us on Facebook, we're Cure Castleman. So just Cure Castleman. That's our Twitter handle. It's also Facebook.com/Cure Castleman. So those are two ways. Then as far as AMF goes, if you search on Facebook it's Facebook.com/AMF College Student Grief, then you can find us there. And of course, you can always reach out to me directly through Twitter or through Facebook. It's just my first and last name, David Fajgenbaum. and I'm always happy to contribute anything I can, whether it's rare disease related or, of course, Castleman's.
Well, we really appreciate you being on the show today, and we wish you the best in everything from now till we meet again. So, thank you so much.
Sounds great. It was an honor to be on the show with you guys. Thank you so much for all that you guys do.
Thank you, David.
All right. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.
All right, you too. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. Find us online at twodisableddudes.com. And please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts.
We'd like to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Special thanks to our audio producer, Jake Tompkins, who also composed the music.
Until next time, keep living with urgency.